Welcome to Positive Philter with your host, Philip Wilkerson, a podcast that focuses on friends, family, health, and career, with a little self-help along the way. Please join me in this journey for self-improvement, and I hope what I have to share will make you a better person, thus making the world a better place. I hope you enjoy the show. I hope you enjoy the show. Hello, people of the world. It's Philip Wilkerson back with another episode of Positive Philter. I'm joined by a special guest. Everyone's a special guest because they take time to join me on my show. I'm joined by Eduardo Villavicencio. I probably mispronounced it. He's going to correct me, but I tried my best. I said it over and over again and probably added the end, but I met this gentleman while I am currently in Leadership Fairfax, and he was one of our strengths instructors. He talked about strengths, and if you know anything about me, George Mason University is a strengths-based university. And I was like, man, I know my strengths, but his training taught me something new. And that's something I want to break down to everyone here that listens, that this is a great conversation for anyone that does have appreciation for strengths. There's always something new to learn. Always, it's just the tip of the iceberg. It's a lifelong learning thing. But before we go into it, Eduardo, give the listeners a little bit of background on who you are before we have this discussion about strengths today.
Thanks so much, Phil. I really appreciate it. And yeah, names, what's in a name? So yeah, so Eduardo, so here's the thing. My parents, if they were upset with me as a kid, I knew what my name was because they'd be like, Eduardo Arturo, which is why I know my first name for sure is Eduardo. And my last name, my parents would say Villavicencio. Some in English say Villavicencio. I've had some really good creative ways. So thank you for just even trying and attempting. So, and I used to be a teacher. And so I used to have kids call me Mr. V. And even some of my colleagues would call me Eddie V, which is not something I go by anymore.
Eddie V. Yeah, Eddie V. Isn't that like, I feel like that's a guy, Eddie V. That's, I think AC/DC or someone.
I think Eddie Van Halen So thanks for inviting me. So I'll start off by letting people know I was born and raised in Los Angeles to immigrant parents from Ecuador. That's a really important part of my identity, like my name is, for example. And being a first generation, both born here and first generation college graduate, for me is also part of the work that I do. I call myself a conversational choreographer for the last couple of years. That has looked anywhere from being a K-12 teacher when I first graduated with an economics degree from college. I ended up being a middle school math teacher. I thought it was temporary, but 15 years later, I had a career in K-12 education as a teacher, a technology trainer for my colleagues, and eventually an IT director. I left that eventually to start my own freelance business, helping schools, nonprofits, and government organizations to do software training, implement software. But what I didn't realize is I was going from being a software trainer to a soft skills trainer. Nowadays, the HR world calls it power skills, right? Those communication, the listening, the team building, managing people, that type of thing. And so when you and I met, I was doing a CliftonStrengths workshop. My first exposure to CliftonStrengths was in 2010 in grad school. I took it, didn't really believe in it, didn't get to use it till 8 years later. And I can tell more about that later when a coach explained what this actual assessment was and what it meant. So nowadays, what I do is I contract for various companies. I help individuals, like yourself, basically, or, in groups, get to know a little bit better of themselves, what they bring to the world. That my passion is that people get to be their highest and best. And sometimes some of the ways we do that is by learning what's in our blind spots. And so I love giving people actionable awareness around like an area of their life that may not have been working the way they wanted to, or managers who have teams that are stuck and they're just like, what's going on? And so that's my favorite thing to do. And CliftonStrengths is just one of the tools that I use for that.
Well, I think we're going to keep this conversation in the strengths-based area. And I'm going to make the assumption that, a lot of my listeners may be familiar with CliftonStrengths, but for those that are not, what would you say to someone really quickly about CliftonStrengths for the non-familiar person before we deep dive into the specifics that we know about?
Yeah, definitely. And we should probably then start. So I'll honor, and Phil, you probably already, your listeners know this about you, but so CliftonStrengths is an assessment that the Gallup company that's familiar with, people know it through polls and such, employee engagement surveys, that they have that in 30 minutes gives people their results after 100 and so questions about their most natural talents. And Gallup defines talents very specifically as patterns that are natural for them, but that recur of the way they think, they feel, and they act. Some people might call it a personality test, but these would be the personality traits that can be productively applied. So it's all about performance. So it's not necessarily, personality and like, oh, you say this, you're more direct, no, it's actually the way that we motivate ourselves, the way that we engage with our success. So if any goal, that's what CliftonStrengths is. And people get their top 5 strengths, but the first thing, as you may have heard me say, is they're not your strengths automatically. They're just your talents, and they can either be raw or refined. I'll let people know my first 5 are woo, individualization, ideation, analytical, futuristic, and I often get in trouble with my numbers 6 and 7, which are communication and activator. And I can share more about that. But do you want to let people know what your first 5 are?
Yeah, my first 5 is woo, positivity, empathy, developer, and communication.
Yeah, so you and I share 2 right off the bat in the first 5. That's awesome.
Shout out Wu-Tang. I used to do that Wu-Tang when I meet another woo. And so, I think, diving into it, and we can talk about the broad stroke stuff, but the thing that I found very interesting about yours presentation that was unique to me was more so about almost the duality of your strengths. And what I mean by that is, like, if your strengths go unchecked or not full awareness, it can turn into a detriment. And that was not something I've always thought about, right? When you think the word strengths, you're like, man, if I just hone in on it and do my best with it, it's going to be all great. But there's things where you're like, we need to understand how maybe the woo could be an off-putting thing to someone else in that part. So that's the part I want to talk about, is like that duality of just being careful and aware of your strengths, but like, when's the line to be, cognizant of, am I using it in the best way, or am I also, kind of like, not saying doing harm, but like not doing a positive impact with it,
Yeah, definitely. So is that a question you want me to kind of answer for you?
Yeah, the duality part, like, we always focus on strengths, and I think strengths are great. But my question, and I, like I said, the thing I liked about yours is we talked about woo, but then you shared some things like, hey, these woos out here, you need to make sure that you said blind spots or all those things. Woos out here, you need to be aware of X, Y, and Z. And we wrote it out and we talked about that, that thing.
Yeah, definitely. Well, and I also want to share with your audience is, even the fact that, so positivity is one of your top talents, right? For me, it is one of your patterns where you get to win, you get to be successful, and you bring that to a team, to a conversation, to this podcast. It is no accident that your podcast, right, the title of your podcast, right, is positive, of course. And so I also want to share why it's important that you and I have this conversation, because in particular, I know that the population you work with is also college students. And between 19, 20, 21, 22, I wish someone had told me take this assessment, because as someone who's presenting Latino, maybe you're African-American, we're in the potentially an underrepresented group in the corporate world or whatever world we're in. And I think sometimes our talents might be perceived by others and stereotyped into a certain group. And I think that imposter syndrome for me has been like there, and everyone has some version of it. So let me tell you how my perception of some of my talents, and again, this is before I even knew what talents or these CliftonStrengths were, is that activator and that ideation talent of mine. For some of those folks who aren't familiar with those two, activator is a catalyst. It brings energy to start something. Right? Ideation is an idea factory. Like, I am fascinated with the newness of something. Well, here's the challenge. I did not know, first of all, that not everyone has ideas a minute, like, right? An idea factory. I also didn't know that starting something, giving energy to something is actually valuable in an organization, even if I'm someone who's not traditionally motivated by finishing or completing something. That put together, what I shared with you in the classroom was that I see these talents, these top 5, not as your strengths, but as your talent patterns or your filters. And they're raw. They're kind of like that, the carbon, the charcoal, right? Where you basically have to actually, go through and then make the diamond. And so because of that, raw talent can be perceived or misperceived or devalued by others when we don't know how to channel the energy or the pattern of information that talent might need. So I think I mentioned to you, woo. Many teachers, and I would go to a conference and I would just know everyone from the conference before, and many people were called woo as schmoozy, salesy, and I used to hate it. But now that I understood, I have a natural way of making people feel safe in a room. I can use it for my own manipulative, schmoozy, salesy thing, or I can use it so that 2 or 3 introverts who might not normally speak up would actually feel safe, right? To say, you know what, I have a question, or I have a doubt, or and to be able to get that's where my woo can be used to contribute instead of necessarily to suck the air out of. Because, there's some times where I have in the past gone into a room and everyone wants to talk to me, and it almost can suck the air out of a room,
I love that. I thought about that too. And I think though the hard part when I thought about that perception, I had the same thing, was that in that perception, you're like, I didn't know. I was like, I wasn't trying, I was just trying to be nice to everybody. I didn't know it was perceived as sleazy. I'm, activator. I was just trying to get us started. I didn't know it was perceived as assertive or too aggressive.
Yeah.
Impulsive. I was trying to be positive. I didn't know it come off as toxic positivity, where they're like, you're not being real to the situation. Like, the house is on fire. But I was like, well, we can do something. We can be resilient.
Yeah.
And so what are some techniques? I know we did some exercises, but what are some techniques to really get others to, think about that perception outside your body perception, while still at the same time, I don't want, when someone tells me, well, the perception is this, I don't want to turn down my positivity.
Right.
I just want to make sure I use it correctly. So how would you have someone go about that in that frame?
That's great, Phil. Well, first of all, that self-awareness piece is important. And I like to tell people, I never want people to turn off their talents. Mm-hmm. What they should know, though, is be self-aware about the intensity of the talents. Yeah. I think of, like, I love music. I think you love music too. I think of a DJ, right? When a DJ comes in and is trying to do the mixing levels, yeah. I think of our talents, our top 5 or top 10 as, like you said, either intensity 1 to 10. Let's bring this one out, or a dimmer switch, like you said, with the lights. Hey, how low, how high? So in other words, in a situation where a team needs like a cheerleader of sorts, right? If your positivity is an 8 out of 10, great. And sometimes, though, I'm certified as a pro-side change manager. We talk about the 5 stages of grief. Sometimes when a team just got some bad news, people just got laid off. You actually want to take that 9 or 8 on positivity and maybe bring it down to a 4 or 5, and bring up one of your other talents, which is woo, and bring it up to a 9 and say, hey, you know what? This is maybe one of those times where silence might be good.
Or empathy.
Listening. Yeah. Oh, you have those beautiful relationship building talents, empathy, where you can say, I don't know what it feels like to be you right now.
Yeah.
But so back to how can someone do that without knowing everyone else's? You know what I love to do? I love to ask questions, even if it's not out loud, because you and I, as communication talent, we can put our thoughts into words really quickly. For other people, silence is actually what might help. So if you ask yourself a question that would help, go, you know what does the room need right now? I can offer. And that question might have you go, oh, maybe they need silence, or maybe they need a good question, or maybe they need safety. Where can my woo developer? Maybe they want to grow, is one of yours, right? Maybe what's a question I can ask them that might help them grow? And that is the intentionality of taking a raw reaction to a refined response to the goal at hand. In that case, right? Maybe there's another goal, like activator, for example. Can I share one example?
Oh, sure. Yeah, I love this.
The first time I got coached, so I had a corporate job, didn't go well. I left 6 months later, and someone said, hire a coach. And that's how I discovered strengths, because this coach said, what are you good at? And I said, well, I'm technology, and I'm good at this. And she's like, no. Do you know your strengths? And again, I just kept blurting. She's like, have you ever taken this test? I said, oh yeah, 8 years ago in grad school. She's like, pull out the results. Quickly, in 30 minutes, she helped me see that in my first corporate job that I had, when I was new and I was really, I totally could get it. I would butt in as soon as the team, there was no one saying anything. I'd be like, I have this idea. What if we ask the client to do this and do that? Now, I didn't know that then, but now I know that was in my activator talent, taking my ideation talent, my futuristic talent, and just blurting it out, like literally like a fire hose, right? However, once I got coached, the next year I was a new hire again at a different company, similar type. And a meeting came up where no one was saying anything. But this time I asked a question. I was like, excuse me, manager, I know I'm new here, but I was curious, this is a good time for brainstorming some ideas. I have some ideas about maybe where we could go with this. And that manager was like, you know what? I appreciate your initiative, Eduardo, but this thing, we can get off track easily. Maybe save that for later. But I did not feel shut down. I felt heard, which is really important, because that manager chatted me right after and said, hey, I really like how you brought that up. I know you just got here, but what are some of your ideas? And within 10 minutes, I had told him all this information I gleaned from my individualization talent meeting with different people on the team while I was waiting for my computer equipment, my badge, my credentials. And he said, wow, let's present that at the next meeting. And I said, no, the other two people present, because I'm really good at presenting. I think they would love to hear them. And so it was just a wonderful way of taking talents that the year before were just I don't know, unmanaged, raw, and completely channeling and focusing. So I think back to what you would say, the two things is, one, self-awareness, and two, find the language that describes to you what you naturally bring, and find ways to ask, hey, is this a good time for me to pull out developer empathy? People might not know what those talents mean, but you know what they mean, and you can find language. And actually, Chat GPT and AI is a great way for like creating your own language around the talents.
I love it. And then I think about it like, the grief one, you said the stages of grief, right? Like, I think, someone has a funeral, you're not going to go in and it's like, hey, read the room. You'll say funny stories and say that you love somebody, but you're not going to be like too positive because everyone's sad. So I love that dimmer part where it's still like, even in a situation as sad as a funeral, there's still a little bit of positivity. Like we honor the person's life, but we're not going to be overtly extra about it, understanding that the room is sad. So I like that dimmer switch. Now, how about as a leader, the cognizant thing to do that, like give people feedback to them, how to dimmer, right? Like you got someone on your team that maybe is input, but you see where, the blind spot that they're taking in too much information and not making decisions or being indecisive, or we have our analytical strategic people and they're too isolated by themselves and not building relationships, or people have their blind spots. As a leader, how would you bring that up to someone else while, like you said, not dimming their light, not dimming their gifts?
Oh, good question. And this is assuming as a manager of the team that they know their talents and I know their top five.
Yes,
right?
we did the exercise. We all bought in. We see the complementary relationships in our team, but we're also like, we're trying to, maximize it and do the best we can and be in our lanes. But we see some people are too far in their lanes that are not really, like I said, it's not being helpful at that point. It might be too.
Well, let's use the example you have. So for your audience, right, who might not have input or analytical, the ones you mentioned in their top 5 or 10, I have analytical, so I can speak to people exceptionally talented and analytical. They love the data, love the facts. And I don't have input that high, but folks with input would always ask questions and are trying to get all of the answers before they can maybe take a decision or next step. So the best thing to do is going back to that curiosity piece that my individualization always says, ask a question. So first I would, if we're doing let's lessons learned kind of meeting, you know what, in that last meeting or that last outcome, that last client call, let me ask you a question. Which of your talents do you think showed up in a way that was helpful for that goal? First, what was the goal? Make sure they know. Then, which talents showed up? And this is almost like Gallup's research on It's a Manager talks about how people don't want a boss, they want a coach, right? Mm-hmm. And so a coach asks questions that pulls out of them the realization is, you know what? I think on that last meeting with the client, I was asking for too many questions. And if anything, I've gotten feedback that my analytical sometimes occurs to other people like I'm interrogating them.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and what they don't know is, no, it's not personal. I'm actually not. I don't doubt them. But unfortunately, my pattern of thinking sometimes feels like I need all the information before I can take a step, which is why I have to take that analytical and bring it down. So as a manager, I would ask the person, and actually I shared with you a document that is called the Bring Needs. That document is what really helped me when I work with teams or individuals as a coach with CliftonStrengths. Their report is great, 16 pages. But in one page for each of their talents, I can have them see what do these talents normally bring to the table? And what do these talents need, or what motivates this talent to show up? Or even worse, what if it's not there? Right? What makes the person not be able to use that talent? In other words, like someone with analytical, I might need information. I might need more. I might need a link. So as a manager, I would finish the conversation with the person who has input or analytical. And I say, okay, hey, tell me, what is it that you need from me in a meeting? Or what do you need from the client that maybe you don't, ask the client? Maybe you ask me or you ask a team member that would make you feel like you have enough information. And so that way I am speaking to, what do you think your analytical or input talent needs from me or before the client meeting? In another situation, if someone had developer empathy and you're like, oh yeah, my empathy keeps showing up, my positivity keeps showing up with the team. And it's like, okay, hey, which other talent could actually serve you? Could you bring up a level to get the same information you wanted or the same point across? So like you said, if positivity, maybe you just want people to feel open. Okay, well, maybe you use your woo for that one. So, and that's that dance, kind of like the mixing board. You can also think of your top 5 or top 10 talents as your board members. Everyone lives life and you're the CEO of your life. But what if you thought of, and this is my ideation metaphor, right? What if you thought of each of your talents as a different board member for your life? And you could say, hey, Mr. Positive, in your case, right? What would you do in this situation? What would you want to succeed? Mr. Communication, what would you do? Again, it's a little metaphorical, but hopefully your audience can see, oh, okay, yeah, if I'm managing a team, that team is like my board, of directors of sorts.
I love it. And so one of the things, I remember the exercise, and I can't remember the nuance of it, but I really enjoyed it, where we stood up and we all said, oh, me too. And we shared what we thought about strengths. Can you remember,
Sure.
recall that? And because I feel like that was also part of that blind spot stuff. I just can't remember the nuance of it. I do remember really enjoying that.
Oh,
and it was
great.
like, oh, me too, but it was like a connecting piece.
Yeah. So before we even talked about strengths, and just to let you know, Philip, that exercise is an example of learning from other coaches. So I'm really glad you and I are having this conversation, because I'm going to take away so much from this conversation. I hope you do. I really hope your audience does. But I know that activity, I had only seen that like 2 months earlier before I worked with you, and I had actually implemented it twice before. So you got the third time's the charm of that. So in short, for all of your listeners, what we did is, before we even talked about the top 5 strengths, I have a set of cards. Think of them as of patterns of behavior, clues to talent. So I had everyone pick, right? Hey, which card really says something that's just like you? So for someone, it might be, I meet new people. And I love meeting new people easily. Okay, so, and then pick a card and put in your right hand that you would totally reject. That's not you. So I look for the past information to help me, information from the past. So everyone had a card that they really sounded like them, their pattern, and everyone on the right hand had one that didn't. And then what we have people do is easily read around the one that was like them. And sometimes you see people get excited about the energy. Other people like, oh, me too. I wish I had that card. Okay, that's easy, right? But then we had people say, hey, what's something that doesn't resonate with them? And I loved when, I think it was someone in the room, in your room, who basically said, oh, I'm busy. I like to be busy or stay busy or something like that. This does not sound like me. And somewhere 2 or 3 people said, hey, that sounds like me. And they run over to get that card. And then the point was give an example of when that sounded like you and how that fuels you. And so we did that. And so what you saw is people being willing to say, this doesn't sound like me. Right. And the cool part is that other people said, no, that is me. All of a sudden, the concept, hopefully, and I'd love to ask you what you got out of it. My goal is that people feel, again, safe to say, this isn't my pattern. I don't win with this. But to also see, oh, it's okay that it's not mine. Because there are 3 other people in my group, my class, my team, who like really get charmed and livened and energized by doing the thing that I think either 1, I'm not good at, or 2, I don't want to do, I don't like it, or both. So that's my goal. What did you get out of it?
Yeah, I think it was the same thing. I think it was more so like permission to say like it's okay. Like when you see other people, because I remember like very visibly people like me, like, and so when you saw someone that like when they admitted that something was not in their lane, it wasn't an admission of failure. It was more like, oh, there's other people that don't like this either. That's cool. And then for, and so it like, because, I think a lot of times in both ends, when we see it, you're like, wow, like I'm not really a fan of data, and I thought it was the only me. Then you're thinking like, wow, I'm not a serious worker or professional, right? You already make assumptions that the things that you're not naturally gravitated to in a certain space means that it's a deficit, and so not seen as a deficit, seen as like, wow, that's just a preference that I don't have, and also a preference someone else doesn't have. That's cool. We just both don't have a preference for it. And that's okay. We don't have to have a preference for everything. Inversely, I did do the thing where I'm like, wow, I don't like it, but I'm looking at who does, because, I need to go to that person to do it. And so, and that was cool because, me, I am a relationship building person that like, I always say this in every room I'm in. Have you heard the story of Charlie Munger and Warren Buffett?
No, share more.
Okay, so everyone knows Warren Buffett.
Yeah.
You know Charlie Munger?
No, I haven't. I heard the name, but no, I don't know what he did.
Google Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger.
Okay.
Warren Buffett is the one that's always known. He's the book writer, this, whatever. Charlie Munger is Warren Buffett's best friend, right-hand man, more introverted, doesn't always get the shine, but doesn't want the shine. And there's interviews that say, I would not be who I am without Charlie Munger. Yeah. And so with that being said, when I heard that story, I joked that my friend Dorothy Hayden, she's an old coworker of mine, but just over time has become like a ride or die friend.
Yeah.
And I joke that she is my Charlie Munger.
Nice.
Like, I'm the mouth, she's the brain. I always feel comfortable going to her. She's more thoughtful, she's more analytical. She gives me constructive feedback. And inversely, I've taken her to events and I'm like, yo, you need to meet my friend Dorothy. And I'm talking really loud and I'm bringing her around and bring her. And I wouldn't say she's really like quiet, but I'm loud.
Yeah.
We complement each other.
Yeah.
And so I joke about that is that when I learned about complementary relationships, I always dived into that story of Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger, understanding that like they both in a symbiotic way, they both, a rising tide raises all boats.
That's right.
And they didn't need to be any different than who they were. Warren Buffett stayed as Warren Buffett. Charlie Munger stayed as Charlie Munger. And when you have a good complementary relationship, they know they credit both each other. They like appreciate both, each other. And like I said, they don't both need shine. Like Charlie Munger is totally. And then there's other relationships that were very similar, like Elton John and his songwriter. Yeah. All these different relationships of the quiet companion. I like to call it the quieter companion, meaning like they're a strong companion. That, maybe the public doesn't know it, but that person that's the loud one would not be who they were without that quiet companion.
I like that. Yeah, that's right on. And you use the word many times that Gallup uses to call it complementary partners.
Yeah,
literally. And actually, funny enough, the 5 guiding principles that Gallup talks about with CliftonStrengths, I'll summarize real quick, is talents, they're neutral, all right, and they're not labels. right? And the whole basis on that is that people, right, differences are an advantage and people need one another. So on a team, I grew up in a culture, in an environment where it's like you're supposed to be well-rounded. I wanted to go to an Ivy League college, and I'm supposed to be well-rounded. Well, I wish I had known at a young age that actually these top 5 talents, and some coaches refer to them as you're not well-rounded. You're a 5-pointed superstar, right?
Yeah.
Like those are your superpowers. And if you take a bunch of people who have superpowers and you put them around a table, then that team will be well-rounded.
Yeah.
So part of what you acknowledge is, hey, complementary partner. I love what you just offered about that activity, because I'm going to remember it from now on, that maybe one of the best parts of that activity is the permission, right, to not be good at everything. And there's a grace, because when I can give myself grace and not being someone who is the to-do list maker, then I can also give grace to someone, who has a talent that's separate than me, who always needs to know about the past, or always wants me to repeat something and go very slow, or always. So by the way, positivity, just to let you know, Phil, was one of those talents that, because it's lower in my talent filter for me, it actually is I used to have a visceral, and I still do, visceral reaction when people are positive with that talent. When it's overused, or I perceive it as like, oh my gosh, I can't deal with this positivity. And some people say, but you're so positive. I'm like, no, I have woo, individualization. I can see future, but positivity doesn't come natural for me. So I'm very, very aware that sometimes I perceive positivity. And you mentioned the words, which is unfortunate, right? Sometimes people call it toxic positivity. Well, the reason they think it's toxic is only because it was not channeled, not tapered, not refined. You were well-intentioned, but now we only need 3 out of 10 intensity positivity until people are ready. Now I'm going to bring my 7, 8 because people need that. And so every talent, I think, has a barrier label.
Yeah.
But the fact that you also know you can take your communication positivity and you can find someone that has that maybe lower on their chain, they need you. So complementary partners, I think one of the best ways that Gallup defines and then your talents are also complementary. They produce a dynamic. It's called theme dynamics that allow you to say, well, you know what? I don't have achiever, but I do have activator and I do have futuristic. How can I combine those to produce the result that I want? Because it's back to your performance, not just the personal.
Yeah, I like the performance one. I think, one of the things too I've learned most about strengths over time is, kind of like Pavlovian response, is that not over seeking, but like if you see someone's patterns that have a positive impact, feeding it so they do it again and again, right? So I always make sure that I do something where I'm really trying to appreciate the strengths of others. But also I've learned too now, this is also thinking about it, is with that appreciation, I've learned like what's called the workplace love languages.
Oh yeah.
That, like the Charlie Mungers, I like the Charlie Munger example.
I like that.
They don't want you to give them public shout outs. They get embarrassed. So their way of you seeing appreciation is either you just do the work without being asked, or you offer assistance without being asked, like just finding like the individual ways to do it. And so that's something to think about with my channeling that in communication. Also channeling the positivity, right? Like understanding like, maybe at this time, someone they want to hear a little bit about resilience, but they don't want to be too much where it's disregarding their adversity and their pain, right? And so that dial is always a good one to like, I think about where do I need to turn it down. And I think one thing that really came up in this conversation that I liked about you is that the 5 point strengths is that like you don't need to be individually a superstar, but if we all do our lane, we'll be a superstar team. Yeah. And I'm going to give you a concrete example. This is going to come out in a while, but just last night, Indiana won the national championship in football.
Hey, I'm an honorary Hoosier. I was invited by.
Well, I'm an honorary Hoosier too because Coach Cicchetti came from James Madison, where I went to undergrad, and when he went to Indiana, he brought like half his team with him, right?
Wow.
The transfer portal. The point is, They were a team made up of no 5-star recruits. Their Heisman quarterback was not highly recruited out of high school.
Yes.
But he knew his lane.
Yes.
His lineman knew his lane.
Yep.
The running backs know their lane. And so they may not be on paper individually, 99s in Madden, right? Top ranked. But as a collective, they are the most disciplined team, and they play team ball that they won the national championship, which I think sports is always a good way to do this. But it goes back to saying, like, if the coach did a great job, he could corral them and put people in their strengths. He was already good at recruitment, but also like not trying to be someone they're not. They're all happy to be who they were. Like, I remember right before that game, the quarterback said, "I think the player of the game is not me. It's the whole offensive line." And then they gave the player of the game one offensive line, and he was like, "Technically, I'm just like the captain of the line," but it was the whole line, and that shared credit. And I love that. And I was cheering for them. I think they deserve the national champ. But it was a perfect example that not individually, none of those guys were stellar high school recruits. Yes. But together, they were a really amazing, unstoppable team. But I think it's going to be a great case study for strengths moving forward.
Yeah, you know what, Phil? I'm so glad you brought that up, because I've just educated myself around this, and I got deep dive because Freddie Mendoza happens to be Cuban American. Yeah. He, like you said, Miami, he went to UCal Berkeley. He's playing on a team with his brother. But yes, really, if I look at Signetti, right, again, just very, very little, right? What I understand is that gentleman probably has individualization, because he can find uniquely what the talents are of each person. And he has to trust that they're going to show up as their best self, not as a core. Like Freddie Mendoza is not trying to be Tom Brady or some other, right? He is literally him. And there are people who might mock him for some of the way his speeches are, but he gets to be him. And I think that coach, like a great manager in the workplace, has given permission for every one of his players to show up how they are, not to try to change or be someone else. Yeah. And he's produced a work ethic where they can see results. And like you said, every one of Freddie Mendoza's, everything is about, it's not me, it's the team. It's not me. And that can come from him, but it's supported or encouraged or modeled from the coach. And I think you're right. We, as strengths coaches, I know you're certified, like we sometimes like to do subconscious strengths spotting. So maybe we could pick a talent that is showing up for each of those players. But even that, again, timely, I happen to now study this over the last 8 hours. The fact that they had a quarterback draw like designed, sure, whether or not they'll use it, but they must have practiced that, right? And then at one point, the coach has to say, this is it. And the quarterback and the team has to go, we trust the coach, we trust ourselves. And then he has to actually execute. That speaks to so many talents coming together all at once, right? And each of them knowing what they're each good at. And I know you said like stay in your lane, but yeah, exactly. We each bring something to the table. It's important for us to be self-aware about what is that, give it words so that others can understand without having to know what my top 5 words are, right? But you said appreciation, that's the name it, claim it, aim it piece Gallup talks about. It is important to appreciate how they show up when they're at their best, but also how they might be perceived to others when they're not channeled. So I'm so glad you brought that up.
And I think sports are just a great analogy for that. I mean, I think we see a lot of championship teams, and some have very blatant superstars on them, but there's been lots of other examples of teams where it's like the pieces were that, and if when a guy leaves that team, he was the same player, but he didn't get the same results. Deion, I'm just making one like Deion Ranch. He was, he won a Super Bowl with the Patriots, but then when he went to a different system, he wasn't a superstar. He was in that system, he shined. And so thinking about, I think that's a great lesson to learn. It's like systems matter. Systems, your natural talents matter, but like if you're not in a system that works for you, you might not be as successful as an individual performance. Yeah. And so I think that's kind of things you have to analyze. So maybe bring that sports analogy, right? Mendoza went into the transfer portal, and obviously he had to see something in Indiana and say, you know what, I'm going to take a chance. He did take a chance. He's like, I got 1 year eligibility left or whatever. I believe in this. I hear, Coach Cicchetti is good at this. I'm going to trust him and take this risk. So maybe we can translate that to a working professional.
Yeah.
Your top 5. What are some of the things that a working professional can do to look if they're going to join a new team or a new organization, to do that filter to say, yo, I'm taking a risk by entering a new culture. But I believe that by this assessment, I think I could be able to shine here. Maybe there's some questions you should ask in an interview. What are some thoughts you have there?
Oh, I like that. So you brought up 2 things. So first, back to what can the individual do? It starts in that interview process, right? Being clear, like, what is my next level of growth that I would want from the next company that I'm either not feeling I'm getting or is not available, right? So ground that. In the interview, say, hey, these are my talents. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this, but this is what I've brought to the table, and this is where I've grown and I like to grow. Do you use CliftonStrengths in your company or some version of this? What helps you bring out? So that would be a question at the interview stage. Once they're there, what I would say, let's just say they said, oh yeah, everything worked out. When you get to the team, you might go to the manager and say, hey, what's a way that we all get to talk about what we bring to the table, what we're looking forward to. You mentioned the appreciation languages, the 5 appreciation languages of the workplace, I think, right? Words of affirmation, all that. I think it would be good for that individual contributor to ask the manager, hey, what are ways that we appreciate each other? And I think that's not a bad way to start, and to just say, give some language and translate, like, what is it that I bring to the table. The other thought I had system-wise, because you talked about the system, was there is research that Gallup has done on the 4 basic needs of followers. Since you said team, I like to use this as the 4 basic needs of teams. And there's 4 of them. There's trust, compassion, stability, and hope, right? And those 4, usually we say followers want that of their leaders. But if you think of your teammates as people you're leading and people who you're following, then it's really, what do teams need? These 4, trust, compassion, stability, hope, they need behaviors that exhibit that. So I think if I were to go back to the Hoosiers, right, I could see trust easily. We just talked about that. Stability, there's a consistency to their work ethic, their practice. There is compassion in that. I think even though the coach never smiled, like you could, right, he eventually raised his arms and then he had that grin, right? But you can see that as tough as he is, he's forgiving. He gives them grace around mistakes and moving on. And that final one about hope, I think he painted a picture for them, from what I understood, and I haven't gone deep down, like 2 years ago, of what's possible, such that everybody was making fun of him. I don't know if he was saying we're going to be the champs or what he was saying, but that is what a leader can do. So if you're new to a company and you want to know, am I going to be successful here? You can just start by saying, hey, how do we build trust? How do your leaders provide compassion? How do they show compassion, provide hope, and offer stability? And I think I like those 4 because it's a model of psychological safety. And if people feel that they can make mistakes, that means they feel they can learn. That means they feel, and then everyone gets to grow.
Yeah, I love that. And I like that example. And once again, I think I tell people, when you're interviewing for a job, understand that, yes, you're the agency might be a little bit more on the employer, right, to hire you, but you still have an opportunity to stand in your truth and skills, and you're an asset to them as well. So asking those good questions about how can I bring my best self to your organization, and understand like that they're not, regardless, maybe money is the issue. You need to get a job when you need a job, but also understand that like they have to kind of sell them a little bit, sell themselves to you.
Yes.
And so if there's any red flags there, that wow, like they're going to stifle or dim my strengths here, that might be a red flag. Like I'm not going to go to an accounting job and say, hey, is there opportunities to go out and do outreach? And they're like, no, you got to go to your job every day. And, like, I'm not going to be able to use my gifts, right?
Right.
So.
And Phil, I'll say one last thing. Maybe as you're interviewing, get a coach. Or when you get the job and you forgot to ask, hey, how do people grow here? Can I get a coach? Do you have professional development funds? And I've actually been recently in the last couple of months, I had folks who use their professional development funds because at the end of the year, they didn't have time to go to a conference, but they hired me to coach them. And I'm so excited because what I know now, 4 decades in, different careers, different industries, I didn't know in my 20s, right? And I didn't know I could ask for help. I didn't know that there were different ways of getting help. I didn't know the difference between a mentor, a sponsor, a coach, a boss. So I think all of those things, and I'm so glad that your podcast talks about, everyone can create their positive life. Like, what's their highest and best version? Find a coach, because we all need one, and we don't have to go at it alone. I think that back to your team analogy, I'm pretty sure, that quarterback doesn't ever think he's alone. And I think that's important because he gets to, there's a container. Back to you and me having Woo. Folks with individual talent help create containers that people, I think, can feel safe to be and bring their highest and best, or to show up as their worst version of themselves. They're more critical about themselves than others would be. So.
All right, well, this is a great episode. I think we're going to transition to our next segment. It's called Shot for Shot. You get to ask me any random question. I get to ask you any random question. You want to go first? I'll go first.
Oh, okay. Activator would have me go first, but I'll let you go first.
All right, I like that. What is a recent example where you were in your bag, you were in your lane, and your strength got to shine in a recent example, and you were able to step back and be, man, I was in my bag. I was doing it today. Well, a recent one.
Yeah. So right now, one of my most consistent clients is a government defense company, advanced technology company that hired me to do new hire orientation. Now, I'm a part-time contractor, but they have put me in front of every week, 2 days in-person training, flying all their new employees from Japan, Germany, Hawaii, in the room, 80 people. And I am delivering both content, but also culture. And when people find out after 2 days, they realize, oh, you're not full-time here? You're like the best first impression any new hire can get of a company, right? And that compliment, right, is speaking to a couple of my strengths, right? One of them is I'm not trying to sell them the Kool-Aid, right? Like, I only will tell them what I've seen and witnessed from guest speakers, from other new hires, from such. So that's a moment where I get to be every week in my lane around. I use my individualization to remember people's names. I use my woo to quickly make people who might feel they're retired military folks who are now new hires, and there's also just out of college. They're in the same room, and I'm trying to get them just connect with each other because again, the company's cultures don't go at it alone. So I want them to connect. I want them also feel productive. So I think that's my individualization. My communication obviously allows me to speak, and then my ideation activator and includer talent, which is deep down 8, 9, or 10, helps them feel like this company is welcoming them. And so every week I get some version of, how do you remember everyone's names? Or, wow, you're a great first impression for someone who's not, they should hire you full time. And that is the best compliment ever. After a new hire goes through 2 days of, why did they make me fly here and get a dog sitter, a kid sitter, a house sitter, and everything. So that's one of the times I've been in my lane.
All right, what's your question for me?
My question for you, and I love asking this question in an interview, is there a question, pretend I've asked you 5 questions, and I say, Phil, is there a question that you wish I asked that I haven't asked yet? What would that be?
I don't know. I was kind of ready after listening to your story. I wanted to kind of recall a time I was in my bag, but I was like,
do that. That was my other impulse.
I was like, man, not to sound bad. I was like, I thought it was a good question. Let me see if I recall that for myself, and not to be narcissistic, but like,
it's not. It is. Yeah, you shine it.
Okay, so I call myself the unofficial mayor of Mason as a joke. If people think that's from a place of narcissism, it's not. I I shared in my TEDx that it came from a place of not being confident, and I use it to weaponize this personality, this woo. When I got to Mason, I just talked to everybody, and someone's like, Phil, it's like you're the mayor. And because I talked to everyone, and I did ChatGPT, made a job title. But recently, I was like right before the holidays, I went to the president of George Mason invites a lot of the people that are involved with the Alumni Association. And I think this one had just faculty and staff and all these just people to his house for a Christmas party. And I got to bring my wife, and we went with one of my colleagues who is a professor in the School of Public Health. But we have never been we never even seen each other at work, really. Like, she's a family friend, right? Yeah. She only knows me as Philip, Philip, the family friend that we've known for 20 plus years. She doesn't know me on campus because we really don't see each other, faculty, and the university is so large. And so we get to this Christmas party together, and just everyone was like, hey, Phil, hey, Phil, hey, Phil. And my friend that's the faculty member in public health was like, oh my gosh, you legit know everybody here. And I was like, oh, I just be talking to people. Yeah. And that was that part where I'm like, I think that I built a community here at Mason, but then my bag was like, I don't have a big title. I'm not a provost, I'm not a dean, but I've been able to be in rooms way above myself, just being myself, being extroverted, asking questions, remembering people. And it was from dean all the way to the catering people for that. The catering people were like, hey, what's up, Phil? I'm like, hey, what's up? It's like, how do you even know the catering people? I was like, oh, because I see them in the Johnson Center all the time when we talk, when they give me coffee. And so just full gambit. And that's just my bag, right? Like, yeah, I don't know. I felt like in my bag, like, I don't know, I just walk in rooms to be talking. And that's all I said too. I was like, I'll just be talking to people. And I try to do what you do. I try to remember who I talk to and say things like, oh, how you doing? And follow up. So I felt pretty good about that. And that's something I'm really going to try to really actively work on, is that one of the things I didn't like about Woo was that they said they make fast friends. Mm-hmm. And the thing I like to say is I make fast friends, but I also try to do my best to curate those relationships and make them meaningful, not just fast friends. And so that's something I'm actively thinking about, like listening more, asking good questions, active listening, so I can remember things about people, because that's a pretty good thing. Like when you say, oh, how's your daughter doing? You're like, oh my God, you asked about my daughter. That makes them feel heard. Yeah. So I try to take notes, or mental notes, or like in my phone, of little things that people say to me so that I can remember.
I'm smiling. That's a great story, Phil. I'm so glad you're the unofficial mayor, and again, it does show to somehow Woo and your other talents. Sometimes people sense them as essences, and it's the question of, can you turn it from natural to intentional, from raw to refined? And I think part of that would be, if a friend of yours, wasn't sure about George Mason, you can actually speak to, this is actually the community, right? I also wanted to share, you and I should have a part 2 conversation. I got recently certified in something called Listening Intelligence, LQ, and it's an assessment much shorter than the Gallup one, that I would love to share with you and your audience around how do we, right, train ourselves to listen beyond just the signaling active listening, but actually, how do we know that we hear with our ears, but we apparently listen with our brains, cognitive habits? Yeah. How does our listening sometimes affect the way we speak as well to others? There's a whole thing. I just did a webinar recently, and I would love to share that with you, because in college, if I could have learned, my strengths at 19, I could have told that expository writing professor that said I'm not really good at writing, and now I have a trauma-induced writing block sometimes, even though communication is a high talent. I sometimes have to speak and auto transcribe it to write, right? Because I feel like my writer's block. But what if I had said to that professor, hey, you know what? One of my talents is this. How do I write this? I remember the capital punishment essay, with this. Or what if I knew my listening habit, that where I can ask questions from the TF, the teaching fellow, but I realize I'm asking from a conceptual, cognitive preference versus a reflective kind of like, hey, what's my role in this? What's my role in history? What's my role in this class? What's my role in this community group that I am a part of? That's where the listening piece is really good. More self-awareness, like you and I talked about, Philip, is so great. And these are all models. It's whatever model works for you, right?
Well, I'm going to call you the Thanos of assessments. You're collecting them all. You got the all the different ones. And so I got this assessment, pull this out the bag to coach people.
I love that. You know what? That's a great compliment.
Of assessments.
From a guy who always hated, I did not want horoscope assessment. I did not want to be put in the box. And now I realize, you know what? There's tons of boxes. If it works for you, use it.
You're the Thanos of assessments, and try to get to meet people where they are. So this is the part of the show called Shout Outs and Plugs. You get to show love to anyone you want to show love, and plugs. These are things where listeners can follow up with you or things you're working on. Just understand that this is timely and this will go out a little bit later. So you can't say I have a webinar next week, but things that they can stay engaged with you. And so this is your time. Shout outs and plugs.
Yeah, shout out. Well, let me shout out, first of all, there's a lot of teachers who I can't name, but I'm going to shout out. I have a strategic partner right now that I work with. There are two people who told me after I had a really bad time in that first corporate job to go get certified in CliftonStrengths. And one of them is Stephanie, who's an organizational development person. And the other one is my strategic partner with Resonate Now, Juanita Niehaus. They both said, hey, you really love positive, like those positive feelings people get around strength. You should go get certified in this thing. Mm-hmm. That was in 2018. And from there has been just a lot of I get to have this conversation with you, Philip, because someone saw how down and out I felt around, like, I'm an economics major from Harvard. How can I not figure out this corporate consulting world? And someone said, get a coach and then go get certified. And those two people, like, I can see a direct line to who I am today. And then I just have so many mentors, so many male figures who are willing to be vulnerable, which now allows me to be one of those male underrepresented minority like figures, first generation. So a shout out to those folks. And then all the CliftonStrengths coaches, you, Leadership Fairfax, who invited me to get to be with future leaders of the Fairfax County. So I hope I'm the unofficial mayor of Tyson's Corner. That's where I live. I want to be the potentially unofficial mayor and meet the unofficial mayor of Mason so that maybe we can bring some Mason folks to Tyson. So that's a possible plug. I will, in terms of plug, I'll just let people know, reach out to me. LinkedIn.com/EdVisionate is my handle. Resonate Now is the new brand I am launching this year. And again, connect with Phil, listen to his podcast. I can't wait to be more positive because, like I told you, positivity doesn't come natural to me. I have to use some of my other talents to get to positive, but I'm glad that there's so much neuropsychology, neuro research on the brain and what prevents us from being positive. So keep learning, and I'm excited. Thank you for the opportunity to plug. Oh, I forgot to tell you, I co-authored a book last year called Fortaleza. I'm one chapter in Inherited Conversations. It's a really neat thing for underrepresented groups who sometimes we inherit these beliefs. We don't even know where they came from. But I'm looking forward this year to produce a book around listening, learning, and leaping, a way to get us unstuck sometimes. So,
yes. Well, thank you so much for this. As you know, every episode is dedicated to the memory of my late father-in-law, Jeff Kirsch. So please consider donating to the Jeff Kirsch Anti-Hunger Fund for all his work combating food insecurity around the world. Please also, if you're a part of the Mason Nation, consider submitting a Patch for Patriots. That's the program to show kindness. Listen, subscribe, elevate this episode, support Eduardo. I'll make sure I put all the references, his books, all those things that connect with him. Thank you for listening to this episode and have a good one. Thank you for listening to Positive Philter, a podcast that focuses on family, friends, career, with a little self-help along the way. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share it with your family and friends, and like the Facebook page, Spreading Positivity of Movement. Thanks for listening.